Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, where we bring to you the interesting and positive things going on in public education. Today, we're going to explore one of the components of special education. Some of you are familiar with special education. Some of you have heard of it, but aren't very familiar with it. Well, special education has several different areas that one can qualify for. And today, we're going to be exploring the speech language pathology area. And with us to help us explore that is Janet Courtney, who will give a little bit better intro than what I've just done. And she's going to share her background, and then we're going to delve into this very interesting part of special ed, because as I looked over our speech numbers, the majority of our special ed kids are qualified because of speech language pathology. So we're going to explore that and talk about where it's evolved from, where it's evolving into, and so forth, so that our parents can know a little bit more about that. So Janet, go ahead and give a better introduction of yourself, and welcome all the way from Michigan.
Thank you, Dr. Good. I appreciate you having me today. Speech language pathology has been around for a very long time. Students initially, when speech language pathology first started, it was all about the sounds that kids made, but it has obviously evolved into speech and language. So when we talk about speech, we're talking about the sounds that students make, how you put your lips together, how you move your tongue. That's speech. We call it articulation in our field, but and phonology. But speech is what parents will understand, and then language is the words that we use. So language can be how we process what we hear and how we say what we need to say, and how and there's lots of different parts of language. There's syntax and morphology and all of these really $10 words that all make up a language, and pragmatics is a big part of that too, and that is how we are in a social situation and how kids interact in a social situation. So understanding the pragmatics of language is also a part of it as well.
So can you talk a little bit about your background and how it is that you came to be founder of the Lighthouse Therapy LLC?
Sure. So I became a speech language pathologist. I got my master's degree from Purdue University way back in '94. I get to date myself there. So I've been a speech language pathologist for 25 years. Not all of it has been in education, but a good portion of it is. And the last, 12, 15 years has been strictly education. So I started out once I started having kids and wanted that school particular schedule. I started working at a public school and working with students from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. Originally, I worked with hearing impaired kids. At that time, and still today, University of Michigan does a lot with cochlear implants. So I got some really great experience in working with hearing impaired kids and cochlear implants and how that's evolved, and speech pathology and the habilitation of hearing and speech with cochlear implants. And then also language and articulation. And then 9 years ago, I started to do teletherapy, online therapy. And I did that because I wanted to be home a little bit more. I wanted to work a little bit less than I had been working. And the nice thing about online services is that because you can do it from home, it allows you to make your own schedule. So I did that and soon became a lead therapist because I had been a therapist and managed quite a bit. throughout my career. I always have enjoyed working with people and helping people to be the best that they can be. So, so that just kind of was a natural evolution of that. And then 2 years ago, I went out on my own and started Lighthouse Therapy LLC because I really wanted to take care of the therapists. They're the ones that are the front line for companies that do online services, and they really need somebody to mentor them and take care of them and make sure that they're getting the support that they need to provide services, because it can feel like an island when you're working from home and there's no one there to interact with sometimes. So it's really nice to be able to feel like you've got a mentor and somebody that really cares about what you're doing. And the more you take care of them, the more they can take care of the kids and feel confident about what they're doing.
Well, sure, and you're right. One of the things that has been an interesting change over the last, what I say, 3 years, you may have seen it for longer, but at least down here, it used to not be that hard to find special ed teachers, whether dyslexia, whether speech, and so forth, inclusion teachers, but they are very hard to find now. And especially the specialty ones, speech, dyslexia, and so forth, they're even harder. And so, good for you to try to, help your area and help speech pathologists get together and feel valued and supported and so forth, so that they stay around longer. So,
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, the American Speech Language Hearing Association has numbers. They do surveys every year of the staff. There's been a shortage of speech language pathologists for 20 years. Wow. It has been an issue now, and there's always pockets. There's pockets that they don't have to deal with it. They're close to a university, or they're close to a place where there's just a conglomeration, or they're in a really urban area where there's a lot of therapists. But there's always been a shortage. I've never ever had difficulty finding work because there's always work. And it's not just in education. There's, speech pathologists do others besides just special education in schools. But because the schools are a special niche, it's sometimes even harder for schools. They tend to pay a little bit less than, say, rehab or skilled nursing does. So, but we have a passion for working with kids. So it just is one of those dynamics where you can be a speech language pathologist and do a whole lot. That term itself has a whole lot of connotations, but to be really good in education, you have to have a desire and a passion for kids. And so that can limit it too, as far as who and what and where. So.
And you're right about that. You're reminding me about the fact that I live in a very insular world. It's education, public education. That's all I know. I've been doing it for 34 years. And I had not thought about people like speech pathologists being needed outside of education. Well, 2-3 years ago, my great aunt was very lucid. She was in an assisted living, but all of a sudden, I heard from my cousin, her son, that she needed a speech therapist. And I said, what does she need a speech therapist? She's 90 years old. She speaks fine. She's been speaking fine forever. Well, her brain had forgotten how to swallow. Yes, and so they brought in a speech therapist to teach her brain how to swallow again. And so that I had not made the connection. Of course, I don't work in that area, but yeah, you guys are needed in other places besides schools.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually that was one thing I did for part of my career, was swallowing therapy and skilled nursing. But my passion is kids. I really enjoy working with the students. My passion, honestly, is people. I like helping people to do what they were called to do and do what they're good at. And whether that's a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, a school psychologist, counselor, whatever, just helping them. And honestly, when you get into online therapy like I'm doing, it's an added layer. And so helping them to be good at it is important.
So I'm going to go backwards a little bit before we go forwards, because you have sort of teased us with that online thing, but I want to go backwards first. And let's talk about how are speech kids identified?
Okay. Usually it starts out with an initial evaluation. Child find certainly is a big one that will tease out students that are having difficulty. Most people know when their child is having trouble that, we communicate. I mean, every day, you and I, and we develop it, and it develops very quickly as a child. And by the time they're 2, if they're not putting two words together and making sentences, there's a problem. So that part of it, and then being able to understand them, that's the speech part of it. They will come to us and they'll be like, my child's not talking, what's going on? And we have all kinds of developmental tables that we look at and assessments that we can provide. But we really want to get them as soon as possible so that we can habilitate those issues and help them before they become permanent patterns, especially with articulation, because speech patterns and how we speak are related to a neurological pattern in the brain. And the sooner you start working with a child that's saying something incorrectly, the better off they are to be able to get beyond that. So an initial IEP meeting then is done. As you know, we do assessments. We with the parents' permission, and when we look at them, we look at the whole child. We don't just look at articulation, or we don't just look at language. We look at all of it. We look at voice. We look at fluency. We look at language. We look at speech. We look at what services they've had in the past. We look at their birth and medical history. We want to look at all of that. And then once we do that, then we come together as a team and decide what that child needs and the services that they need, and that becomes their offer of FAPE through the IEP.
Again, you're triggering a memory. I had my daughter call Child Find on my grandchild, who was 3 at the time, and when I would visit in Georgia, I would say, Jess, I think you need to call Child Find.
Something's not right.
Something's not
Yeah.
right. And sure enough, she qualified, and they go out to her little preschool, and they do services out there, and it has really worked out well. And the teachers can really tell a difference. And people don't understand that's free.
Yes, it is. It's part of their free and appropriate public education. That's what FAPE. I said FAPE. I'm going to make sure that people understand. And an IEP is an individualized education plan, and that's through the IDEA, which is a federal mandate that students have the right to get a free and public education and to get the services that they need. And a big buzzword in education right now is equity. Not to be equal, because you can't be equal. If I have an issue that puts me here and I need this much services to get to where you are, then that's not equal. That's equity. Let's make sure that they have the services that they need to get as much out of education as they possibly can. And that's part of what speech is, the related services that you referred to before. Speech and occupational therapy and counseling services all fall under that related services.
So we talked offline, and I'll sort of bring that back. I had our SPED people pull our numbers, and in the Plano campus, for example, out of the 41 total special ed kids, we have 26 kids in speech, so that's more than half. And then and that's a K-12 number. In Mesquite West, out of the elementary, 34 are speech. And then our Mesquite Middle, 10 out of 27 are speech. And then in high school, it's only 6 out of 24 SPED kids are speech. And so you said that's perfectly normal. Why is that perfectly normal? The less as
they get older, they tend to dismiss out of speech therapy because they've met their goals. Articulation is something that you have to remediate as a young child. If they get to 7, 8, 9 years old, I'm always sad when I see a student come to me in middle school or high school still working on speech sounds, because speech sounds are embedded, or that neural pathway is set by the time they reach 7, 8 years old. So you're really talking about now we're doing accent reduction, and we're training a whole new pathway rather than embedding the pathway correctly in the brain. We're embedding a pathway. We're having to create a new pathway. So for speech kids, they're the ones that will matriculate out faster or be dismissed sooner than your language or your pragmatic kids. Now, with a student that has autism, it may be that they have those skills and they continue to need those skills all through high school. Other kids will have language issues that they figure out and get better with through the support that we provide them. And that is why that is you shouldn't expect to see as many kids in high school. And I suspect that your high school kids are probably kids that have more severe needs, because by the time you learn to read and then you read to learn, it's a whole different dynamic when you're educating a child.
So you've inferred it a couple times, and I haven't let you go there, but now let's go there. So in the old days, speech was handled, and we're really still, a lot of districts are still in the old days of pullouts. So when a child is identified, then that child has a certain amount of minutes a week that they must go and visit the speech pathologist, right? And
Yes.
so, but as you also have inferred, there's been a shortage in that area for years. And so, how has technology helped bridge that gap?
Well, one thing for certain is you now have, when you talk about technology and online therapy, you and I are a perfect example. You're in Texas and I'm in Michigan. And we're having this conversation and interacting together in a way. And there's lots of different tools and things that you can do to make it fun for the kids. But you now have the ability to get an expert that is, let's say you need a therapist that's really good with hearing impaired students and knows some sign language. You can get a therapist specifically for those students and has that expertise, whereas before you were limited to the geographical location that you were in and what you had available to you within that perspective. Maybe you were lucky enough that you had one, but then she got married and moved away and now you don't have her anymore. So then what do? You try to recruit somebody else. But with online services, as long as you have a really good internet connection and you have the audio and video set up like we do, you can have multiple therapists and multiple experts providing services that you wouldn't otherwise have access to.
So let's talk a little bit about how you service the kids online.
Mhm.
How has that technology, certainly it has aided in getting the services to the kids. How are we using technology to actually teach the kids, since it's not a teacher right across the table?
Okay. Well, think about students. The kids that we have in school right now, none of them, none of them are not familiar with technology. I have a 22-year-old and she doesn't know a world without technology. So they are comfortable with it. The kids are comfortable with it. They learn from games. They're having those online apps on their phone and on their computer from the time that they're little. I mean, sometimes I'm horrified to see a 2-year-old with who's just playing and not engaging at all, and with the world around him. But that's the world we live in. And so these kids really know technology. And then so what we do as therapists and as teachers and as software developers and experts, and there are many experts that are developing online teaching tools specifically for classrooms. What we're doing is we're taking that medium and we're using it in a way that kids are comfortable with and familiar with, and allowing them to use that to aid them in their education. For us as therapists, we have lots of different ways that we can do that through. Now, with our OT kids, what Lighthouse specifically does is, let's say that you have a pen or something that's specific that is to that student. We send a kit to the schools so that whatever is happening on this side is what's happening on this side, so that they have exactly the same thing, because that doesn't always happen, which is great, because then I can show it as an OT and go, here, look, this is what I want you to work on, and this is a tool, and they have that kit in front of them and they can go and they can grab that. Now, with speech therapy, you don't really need that as much. You can play games. You can pull up all kinds of educational apps and boom cards and those kinds of things. And then there's all kinds of just articulation activities and stamps and whiteboard and all these things that are specifically in our platform that allows us to provide those services.
So how does a teacher who is maybe thousands of miles away form a relationship with kids enough for them to want to do what the teacher wants them to do?
It's not a problem. I've never had a problem with my kids they become your own, just like any other. You come and see them. They don't always get that I'm far away. So one of the things that I do as a therapist is I'll pull up a map and go, here's Michigan, and here's Texas, or here's Florida, or here's California, or wherever. And we draw a line, and what a great geography lesson that is, right, in speech therapy. But they see you and they develop that interaction, and you laugh and you joke and you play and you have a good time, just like you would with any other student if you were face to face, and you develop those relationships with them. You have conversations with parents and with teachers over the phone and online, and invite them into your classroom, and always make sure that you're sharing what you're doing with them. And we go to IEP meetings and those kinds of things. But it really isn't. It's just like social media. When you think about the people that you've connected with that you didn't connect with before, that you kind of lost touch with it because you went to high school with them and then you lost touch, and now social media, you've reconnected with them. Because you can have those conversations, you can have those interactions, and the kids are so comfortable with it that they can see you as a person and connect with you. Sometimes I don't think the kids always see us as people, where whether you're face to face or not, they see you at the mall and they're like, oh, you really are a person outside of school,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still that interaction, and it's still a classroom. I always tell my kids, I'm the boss, in my session, I'm the boss, and you have to make sure that you do what I need you to do. And we have lots of tools to help aid with their behavior and make sure that they're behaving how they should be. Now, there is always a support person either in the room or near them should that become an issue. But with most of my kids, I don't have an issue with that because they want to be there. They like the medium, they like the interaction, and they're excited to come.
When you had talked also about some of the other services, for example, the psychology services that I believe that was a service that many people thought would be the one that wouldn't work well. And what did you find?
We have found, and I'm not a school psychologist, but I have friends and I have colleagues and I have employees that are school psychologists. And we found that with these students, think about, you take a student that has an issue with counseling services, and you go in and you're a stranger. You've never met this kid before, this student before, and you go and you take them out of their classroom and you take them to your office. You're taking that child to a place and they're not comfortable. They're not happy about being there. They have an issue already and they don't even want to talk about it. Now they're in a place where there's even less personal space maybe than there was before in the classroom. They're in a less comfortable situation, so they kind of shut down on you. We're finding that's just the opposite, because these students that come to us online are opening up more because they are in a comfortable situation. They didn't have to be pulled away and put in a room. And not that school psychologists didn't do a good job before, because they do, and certainly face-to-face they do a good job. But we're finding that kids are opening up more just because they're comfortable. They're in a comfortable situation, they're in a comfortable place, and it gives them the opportunity to feel like they can say something that they might not say in a face-to-face situation.
So that's interesting. We call them digital natives, right? These kids who have grown up
Yes.
with a digital world, like your daughter and younger, and being comfortable online is something that they have done most of their lives anyway. And so I don't think I'm really surprised in hearing that they get comfortable faster with a psychologist online than they would, be taken to a room and being with a stranger and so forth. So what do you predict for the future as far as this online, what did you call it, teletherapy?
It has a couple of names. Yeah, it's online therapy. The American Speech Language Hearing Association calls it telepractice. Teletherapy is another one that you'll hear. So those are the three main names, and they're kind of interchangeable. They are interchangeable. I shouldn't say kind of. And so as far as like what's going to happen, it's growing. It's just growing. It's not something that's going to get smaller. It's going to continue to get larger. And as more people get comfortable with it, and as younger people come into education who don't know a world without it, they're even more willing to accept it because it's something that they've been doing all their lives. So having that ability to provide services in, and a blended model is sometimes, it's interesting, therapy sometimes is, you have your on the ground therapist, your what we call face-to-face therapists, the therapists that are at the school, and then you'll have your supplement to those as an online therapist, and they will cover students, so you don't burn out that other therapist by giving them a caseload of 60, 70, 80 kids. That's just too many kids for them to handle. The other part of it too, Dr. Good, is think about if you're at a campus, if you're at a school district that has a lot of space between buildings, you're paying premium for a specialized person, a therapist, to drive from school A to school B a half an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is, and you're paying that person to do that. When you do online therapy, you cut that out. So it actually helps with school budgets by reducing that. Plus, there are schools that don't need a full-time therapist. And this is something that's happening as well, is students that could not get services before, students that got up in Alaska that a therapist once a month are now getting weekly therapy because now they have a person that can come to them every day or every week on the computer. So it's just going to get bigger and bigger. And the technology too, it's getting better and better. Even from when I started to now, in 9 years, how much the stability of the internet and access to the internet and
Just the
the
platform,
technology.
yeah.
The
Because
face is getting better.
I've been using Skype for probably 10 years, and Skype was okay, and then it got terrible, and then we went to Google Hangout, and then Skype got better, and so the online platforms have gotten more reliable, I should say. Now,
Yes, exactly. Stability. Yeah.
as always, we're running out of time, but let me ask you one last question. You are in Michigan, and yet you are serving kids from other states. How is that possible? How is it that you're able to just go into most any state, I would guess, and use those services?
Well, you have to follow the rules of the state where the child is and where you are. So as a speech language pathologist, we will be licensed in multiple states. I currently hold 8 licenses. I've had 13. I'm actually licensed in Texas right now. So you have to make sure that your therapists have the credentials, the licensure. Sometimes it's credentials, sometimes it's a license in that state, wherever that contract that I have as a company. I will, contract with the school, and I will hire therapists specifically for that state and make sure that we follow the regulations of that state. And you can imagine that's 50 different states, 50 different types of rules and regulations, but that's the law. We have to make sure that we're doing what is right, both for the legal side of it and for the kids. We want to make sure that we provide quality people who are licensed in that area to do that. And so that's part of what, any online therapy company, they will provide that and make sure that your therapists are credentialed where they need to be. And then the rest of it is just making sure that the connection is good. Every possibility of tech that can happen happens. It does happen. So we have live tech support to make sure that if there is an issue, that there's somebody there that can help them, because not everybody's tech savvy. So we want to make sure that the schools, or if it's a virtual, that the families have the support that they need and the therapists have the support that they need, so that if something goes wrong, they can fix it. And as technology updates and upgrades, it's like, oh, it doesn't work now. It worked yesterday, but now it doesn't work. So we have to make sure that we have somebody who knows, when those updates happen, what we need to do to fix them. So,
am I right in thinking, though, that bottom line, the instruction for the students are pretty much staying the same, whatever state, that it's more just making sure that you're satisfying the laws of the state and checking those boxes, but as far as the instruction is concerned, would that pretty much stay the same?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Now, I will say, though, that you want to be sensitive as a therapist if you're working with a student that's in an area that the say with Indian tribes, or if you're working in the South with primary African American kids, you really want to make sure that whatever you're doing fits their criteria. What are they doing and what's important to them? And any good therapist will do that. We want to make sure that we're being culturally sensitive to the students as well. And that is something that comes into it a little bit more in teletherapy than it does if you're doing face-to-face, because you're immersed in it. So we definitely are very aware of that situation and making sure that we are sensitive to what the students' needs are, because that's what you do. I mean, it's individualized. You want to make sure that you're providing the needs to that student.
And so that was an interesting point. I hadn't thought about the cultural pedagogy part, but what about second language students? Here in Texas, we have quite a few. What do you do when you have a second language student?
Well, we have bilingual therapists, certainly, and any assessment that is done with a student that is English language learner needs to be done both in English and their native language. And then if they're learning in English, we would teach them in English, but we would also want to support the Spanish or whatever language it is. We would, it's easier. It's never easy to find bilingual. They're a premium. But you can have access to them, and you can get them a little bit easier with teletherapy than maybe you could other ways, especially if you talk about somebody that needs Mandarin or needs some other language. But then it's important that that therapist be fluent in both of those languages. And it gets tricky. It gets very tricky when you're talking about that, because if they have a language delay, the language delay itself is not related to English or to Spanish. It's related to language and how the brain is working. So you're going to see that delay. And that's why the tests need to be done in Spanish and English, because if it's just I grew up learning Spanish and now I don't know English very well, of course you're going to score lower on an English test than you would on a Spanish test. That's not a language delay. That's just I'm still learning a second language. Whereas if you are a student that's having a delay in Spanish and in English, then you definitely have a language delay, and we need somebody who understands both of those languages to be able to support that child in both of those languages.
Well, Ms. Courtney, we've come to the end of our show. We, as always, have 30 minutes feel like 5 minutes.
Yes.
And you have certainly made it a comfortable conversation around not only speech language therapy, but how it's evolved and how it will continue to evolve. I've got to agree with you. I certainly do think that the online piece of it will only, grow stronger. It's getting hard to find those specialists as it is. And so being able to tap into companies that have them available to us through the online world makes perfect sense. So thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. And we have come to the end of our show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Good. I appreciate you having me. It's been lovely to speak with you. And I hope I helped somebody.
I'm sure you have. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ask Dr. Be Good show. For more information on Legacy Preparatory Charter Schools, visit our website, legacypca.com, or call 469-249-1099. And remember to like us on Facebook, where we stream live weekly Tuesdays at 3 p.m.